welcome to this week's episode of ClueCon Weekly. Joining us this week again is Fred Posner from LOD, an old friend of ClueCon Weekly, of the telephony at large, and of the open source community. Thank you, Fred, for joining us today.
I love being here, Luca, all the time.
Oh, well, thank you so much. So I hear you've recently been at Kamailio World and you were presenting some interesting stuff. So maybe we could start from there.
Sure. We just got back from Kamailio World, which was in Berlin, Germany. And it was so great to have an in-person Kamailio World. It had been about 4 years since the last one we had in person. Germany has definitely been a little strict as to COVID restrictions and aspects like that. So this was the first year we could do it again in person. And we had a really good turnout, packed room. There was great presentations, and it was just, more importantly, it was just so amazing to see everybody in person again and to see all various sections of the community and things like that. SignalWire had 5 people there, which was amazing. Really good presentation from y'all about the updates in FreeSwitch and everything like that. There was, good WebRTC, good 5G representation. We had our normal updates from people like Sandro in the community, some dangerous demos, and it was just wonderful.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, it's the same vibe we get from ClueCon, which we'll get to later, but the road to ClueCon is we have the same vibe, same people, well, a lot more different people, but similar community, and it's always great to meet people. So about your presentation there and with the work you were doing there, I think there's a lot that you can do with Camellia and FreeSwitch, which I've never. I'll preface this by saying I've always wanted to learn Kamailio, and I never got the time to do so. So sometime I will just sit down and have you explain the basics to me. But for now, what can you do with Camellia and FreeSwitch? That's interesting. What was your talk about? Was the generic setup?
So my talk at Kamailio World was mostly about using API ban in production.
Remember that project? Yeah. People, we've done an episode on it, but if you'd like to quickly re-explain what API ban is.
Sure. So what I love about any of these conferences, and the first one that I went back to in person after a huge timeout was ClueCon last year, and it was amazing. It was so great to see people and engage with the community and see what everything was up to. And so at that ClueCon, I did a little bit of a API ban presentation. API ban is something that started from just these gatherings of open source people in these conventions and conferences, and we were talking about how we're all getting attacked by really bad traffic. And wouldn't it be great if we could share who is blocking us or who is sending us bad information, and then somehow have a share list where we could then block it. And I had some time towards the end of 2019, so I built some honeypots based off of Kamailio, because why not? And so these honeypots just gather anyone sending SIP traffic to them. They're honeypots that should never have SIP traffic in them whatsoever. Because of some of what Kamailio can do, I can also detect bad SIP or non-SIP sent to SIP servers. So, for example, we had some DDoS attacks a few years ago that was using and capitalizing on sending DNS to SIP ports. And Twilio actually discussed that in Kamailio World. Mm-hmm. And I'll digress just to say Twilio was at Kamailio World, which was great. They talked about how they used Kamailio in production and everything like that. And so these honeypots are just sitting there capturing traffic and then relaying it. And then API ban makes that information available in many different ways, including just a simple API to pull down, hey, who is the active IP? A simple API ban to check an individual IP. So just an API call there. There's a integration into Kamailio. There's integration into OpenSIPs, into PFSense. There's IPset. There's some lists that make it easy to put it into Cisco and Juniper firewalls, things like that. For clients that are running on Linux, which could be FreeSwitch or some other PBXs, you can use a Go client that we put out that's open source that will automatically block these IPs and IP tables for you and flush them every 7 days, things like that. So anyway, so that was the discussion that I had in there. Some of the production lessons we learned, the benefits of blocking via IP tables compared to, let's say, not just using a Kamailio or OpenSIPs. If you're using that exit or drop command, there is a significant improvement in running it within the IP table space. And then there was also I'm sorry.
Well, for sure, since it doesn't do application level decisions, right? You're not ifing anything out, it's just drop.
Right, just on being so much lower on that OSI model, you just have an incredible amount of efficiency. And then Sandro Gauci did SIP Vicious Pro attack my system. Of course, it did not survive. He just flooded it with bandwidth that was just unbelievable. And but it survived a lot longer by using IP tables and things like that. So I was actually pretty happy. There's another API that we put out called IP Tables API, which is just a simple locally hosted API interface for anyone to control their local IP tables. And so that's something really good to, for example, and we discussed that during the last ClueCon. So if you see traffic that you don't like from FreeSwitch, you can block it just via a curl statement or just an API call there, which is as many people do in FreeSwitch, pretty darn easy. That's the whole point. So we discussed things like that. Now, where I really like working with FreeSwitch is, of all the things that Kamailio does, and Kamailio does SIP so beautifully, like a wonderful orchestra. But what it doesn't do is PBX features. It doesn't do any kind of class 5. It's a class 4 switch. It's a great SIP proxy. People use it as you would in SBC, or in what I like to call a SIP edge router, or other people call it that as well. But in those aspects where you're using it as a border device or a proxy, Kamailio excels. Load balancing, dispatching, things like that. But if you want to handle media, you want to do conferencing, you want to do any kind of B2B UA type of activity, Kamailio does not provide those services. And that's where something that does those services extremely well, such as FreeSwitch, would come in really well. There's been a lot of improvements with RTP Engine, where that integrates Kamailio, so you can proxy media and even do some transcoding. However, I still say that no one does Opus transcoding better than FreeSwitch, and so it's still one of my go-to deployment factors, is using FreeSwitch as a media server. And the talk that I'm going to give this year at ClueCon is about using Kamailio and then integrating FreeSwitch as an amazing B2B UA, which just gives you a tremendous amount of power.
Yeah, there are some things that, I don't know what the full extent of Camellia features are. I know it does a lot, but I think for things like conferencing, it just doesn't have the primitives. Is that correct?
Right. It doesn't handle it doesn't handle a call per se. So like, you're not going to answer a call with Kamailio generally. There's a module that technically you can, but 99.9% of the use cases, you don't use Kamailio to answer a call. You use it to decide where to send a call. You use it to filter calls. So you could use it as a mid-registration server, or move registration services to Kamailio. And what Kamailio does, since it really only handles SIP, it's not handling media or anything like that, it can do it at incredible scale. So people that are running FreeSwitch know, okay, I start seeing a lot of traffic, just a lot of SIP maintenance traffic when I start having, let's say, 600 users, or when I start having 1,500 users, wow, there's a lot of traffic just going to my free switch for just maintenance of presence and registration and location. Where on Kamailio, with let's say a 2-core or 4-core system with just 4 gigs of RAM, running 100,000 users
Oh wow.
would,
So
would
you
be fine.
do, for example, presence is becoming more, well, at least in my application builder world, we've been using presence quite a bit more with the advent of web-based registrations and multiple devices for the same user. Will that live in the Camellia side of things for a scenario like that, for example? Like I have the same username and password, but it can register on a mobile app, on a web-based browser, and on a desk phone, and it might have all three registered at the same time.
If I'm doing the architecture, it lives on Kamailio.
Hmm.
The way that we see it in most fields would be that you didn't start with Kamailio, you started just with FreeSwitch, so it lives on FreeSwitch. And in that case, it's it's a process, but at first we put in a Kamailio, and that helps do some mid registration and things like that, and then we can start gradually moving the presence away from FreeSwitch and into Kamailio itself, and then allowing you to externally control that aspect, so that they could, let's say, check out on a website and just put, hey, I'm not, I'm no longer available, instead of using their phone, and we could send that information to presence via just some sort of API. So you can do external presence control very easily with some of the modules that we have within Kamailio, and then integrating it to that as the end result scalable solution, which would allow me to have many free switches for hundreds of thousands of clients, or thousands and thousands and thousands of simultaneous calls.
Since we're going down that route, I'm curious. So, Camellia is handling my registration from my mobile phone, or my web browser, and for my desk phone. They're all registered at the same time. How
Yep.
would you handle from the FreeSwitch side? So, an application of FreeSwitch decides needs to call me on my web browser only. How does FreeSwitch know what to address?
I guess it depends on how you're building it, right? So if you are the same AOR or the same user, and you have just decided to, okay, I am doing it via web device, I am doing it via a desk phone, and I'm doing it via a soft phone on my laptop or
Yep.
iPad or whatever. The in the way that I mostly, if I'm doing the build from Kamailio side, FreeSwitch is kind of ignorant as to what type of device that is. So it might tell Kamailio with a SIP header that, hey, I want to send it to WebRTC first, or something like that, to a mobile client first, or to something like that. Or in the case that I see with most use cases, they want every device to get it at the same time, and they want it to try to ring simultaneously. You get people like that where it's like, no, the web is ringing, half a second later. I want them all to ring at the same time, which is just like, come on, let's have a discussion on latency. But the
Well, wait, I don't think there's a way to guarantee that, to be fair.
there is none.
Device
You
is
know.
not, the device itself is going to handle ringing differently. Like, ringing is not standard. It's just a sound played in
Yeah, it
response.
is.
So it could
Especially if
be,
they're in different locations, then you have to have a speed of light discussion. But the
yeah,
um
let's go through that.
but there's you can ring all contacts simultaneously, or based on a preference. So for example, if you did say, hey, I want WebRTC to be prioritized, you could then tell Kamailio, okay, based on the user agent or the type of device that came in, ring that one first, and then if it's not answered after X amount of seconds, then start ringing the others, something like that. So you could do that kind of control that sometimes you would do in FreeSwitch based on the username. You would do with just one username for all of those devices. And of course, you could limit it. So you could say, I only want in Kamailio, I only want one WebRTC client, one soft phone client, and one X client. Or you could say, hey, I want up to 10 registrations, and they could be whatever they want, or one registration and I'm charging or something. However, every client is different. Every business case is different in that aspect.
That's nice. Yeah, I think the scale. So from what I see internally at SingWire too, because we do use Camellia as our SPC, I think Camellia is really the component you need when you start scaling. I will say. So, would you say Camellia is only needed at larger scales, or is it much easier to develop on from the start? Like, will you introduce Camellia if we're doing architecture? It's a prototype, so it's gonna have 10 calls per day for now. Would you introduce Camellia right away?
Well, me, yeah. I mean, I use Kamailio before I even think about what kind of media handler I'm going to do. But that's me, and I'm clearly biased towards Kamailio. We ran it when we had the bakery. We had Kamailio, and we were handling, if we were lucky, 10 calls a day. So but I love it just for security aspects and things like that. So I definitely use it as a SIP edge router to protect everything that I have on the behind it. And I also think that it's pretty simple to add on behind it. Normally, if someone's just starting out, though, it's not there. But you can absolutely start bringing it in, and it's a great way of alleviating a lot of the load from FreeSwitch. So a typical implementation, for example, would be, hey, I started FreeSwitch. I was only having 10 calls a day. And because everybody does things the same way, my prototype all of a sudden became my production server. And out of nowhere, this thing that I was only playing with is now running 600 users, and it has always 100 simultaneous calls, and the system is just having performance issues, and I'm freaking out. So sometimes we'll put in a Kamailio in front of that to offload some of the registration traffic with using a mid registrar, which allows FreeSwitch to still handle all the registration authentication. But as far as FreeSwitch is concerned, the devices are located on Kamailio. It just sends the traffic to Kamailio, and then Kamailio does that next hop to wherever the user is. And it also limits attacks against FreeSwitch, so FreeSwitch doesn't have to worry much about different types of floods and everything like that. So it just allows FreeSwitch to improve its performance, buying you more time to then scale up that server.
Another thing I think we should I actually want to ask you for real. Like, it's not a made up question for keep it going. I really want to know is, I've read that Camellia is actually better to handle web-based registrations. Like, you should probably let Camellia handle your WebRTC stuff and have your underlying stack not even know you're on WebRTC. That probably involve RTP engine and a couple other things too, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we were talking to Tony, he would say, no, do it this way, and
Okay, like, I'm doing 10,000. I have a million web-based registrations active because I'm running a click-to-call service for people.
Right. Yeah. So for me, I believe in using Kamailio for all those WebRTC connections, and then sending that to FreeSwitch via UDP. One of the things that we can do with Kamailio is bridging. So, for example, we could bridge TLS to UDP. We could bridge TCP to UDP. We can also bridge WebSockets to UDP. So that allows me to keep FreeSwitch just UDP, which makes it incredibly performative or performant, or however you want to say it. And then let Kamailio handle that kind of load balancing and aspect of the registrations. If I'm doing a ton of WebRTC registrations and clients, I might also consider, let's say, putting a Janus box as well, and then having that connect to FreeSwitch via UDP, especially since Janus uses Sophia SIP and FreeSwitch, of course, uses Sophia. So they're talking the same exact SIP stack. It's wonderful. So I like, generally I'll do it with Kamailio only, but there are good use cases where I see people using Janus for WebRTC aspects.
Yeah, for large scale, I think the scenario I just thought of, because it's something we're actually looking at, of having a lot of inactive registration. There's a lot of them, and I mean a lot, because if you're doing click to call, if someone puts up your web page, there's a client ready to go there, and that will generate a lot of registration, but not very much traffic, because one about, I don't know, 1,000 people will click the click to call button. So it feels like it's really something you'd want to upload to a very highly scalable service if you're building it out using an open source stack.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would generally do something like that with Kamailio, and then depending on the load, I might have more than one Kamailio and just, have it round robin DNS or something like that. And then FreeSwitch just sends to one, and then Kamailio will figure out which one it needs to go out and handle it that way.
So I do have a related question. Say my service takes off and I have millions of users. I will probably need to cluster those somehow. In general, how does Camellia handle high availability / performance-based clustering? Like, can you link some Camellia nodes together so they share load transparently? Is it harder than that?
No, there's multiple ways of doing this, which is great. So depending on your approach, you might just want, extra nodes, each one handling everything the same. And that use case works for what we call in Kamailio DMQ, which is just, as DMQ stands for most other things, distributed messaging queuing. Kamailio uses that as a method of SIP. And it just allows everything to stay synchronous. So users, dialogues, HTable, which is just a memory table, right? And some other aspects, even presence, all can just be synced. So if I register on one Kamailio, every Kamailio knows about that registration and where that user is. Now, the problem that we have with some of those is depending on the end devices. So on some SIP trunking, for example, it wouldn't matter if the call came from the Kamailio in San Francisco versus the Kamailio in New York. But on a registered device, it might care. It might say, I'm only going to accept a call from the exact node that I registered on. And when we have those types of deployment scenarios, we like to do kind of a hub and spoke model. So I might have, lots of Kamailios all around. Because again, you're saying millions and millions of endpoints. So I might have them in different cities and a couple in each city or something like that. And then those just forward the registrations to a couple of Kamailios on the inside of my, network wherever I want them, probably in different geographical.
So the inside nodes will be sharing the registrations using some kind of backend, while the outside Camellios are just dump the quotes and just forward the registrations down there.
Right. Yeah. So those outside nodes just forward it to the inside. Those sync up with that DMQ. And then when a call comes in, it goes to those and it goes, oh, okay, this call came in through, Seattle 2. And then it sends it to that node to send it to the client. And that's extremely scalable. Extremely.
What's the programming / configuration language looking like for Camellia? Is it a specific language? Does it use its own dialect? How do you configure Camellia?
That is a wonderful question. We don't use XML. We do. There's two main methods. So Kamailio does have its own Kamailio scripting language, which is very similar to many different types of languages. But it's a Kamailio kind of scripting language. That being said, in a few years ago now, and we had a great presentation on it at Kamailio World with some updates. We allow you through what we call Chemi, which is the Kamailio embedded language interpreter. You can write your Kamailio config in several different scripting languages that you might like. It supports Lua, JavaScript, Ruby on Rails, Python. So, for example, someone that's using FreeSwitch that might be pretty comfortable with Lua could write their entire Kamailio config in Lua.
Oh, that's something I didn't know. It might actually help me get started.
Yeah, we had. I mean, there was one is a good ClueCon participant in the past, and he switched his entire Kamailio config to Ruby on Rails since that's what he was very familiar with, and it just was like, wow, it's just amazing. Very happy. So it allows you to use what you do best, with the addition of there's some aspects that you can do within your own Lua or Python or whatever code that you might, save yourself an API call or something like that. You can handle it through that language itself.
Yeah, plus, reusing your existing code base probably helps in many other ways.
Exactly.
Really, really interesting. Cool. So, how does one get started with Camellia?
All right. Well,
I like it. I've never used it. What do I
do? I joked. I think at ClueCon like 4 years ago, I said that there were stages of learning SIP. So the best aspect of learning Kamailio is to first start to get some familiarity with SIP. And I think the way that somebody learns SIP is first you look at it and you're like, oh dear God, what is this? And then you start using something like FreeSwitch or Asterisk, and you're like, oh, this is easy. I get it. It's just like
starts making sense.
Yeah, it's just like HTTP, right? There's a 200 if it's good, a 404 if it's bad. Oh, it all makes sense. And then you go, okay, well, let me look at this Kamailio again, and then you start going, oh my God, I was wrong. I don't know what SIP is. This is horrible. I'll never get this. And then the final stage of learning SIP is to understand that one never really knows everything there is to know about SIP, and you just accept it. So to gain comfortability with SIP enough where when you're looking at your FreeSwitch activity and you use something like SNGrep or Wireshark, and you can start seeing how some of the calls flow, because that's how your Kamailio config is based on. It's based on, okay, a call comes in. What do I do? Do I want to send back that 100 trying? Do I want to then split this call and decide where to send it? Things like that. We have a very active mailing list, as well as a nice matrix channel for anybody to come into. If you go to kamailio.org, we have some tutorials and documentations. There's a free book as well as a book from Acipto that you can buy. But there's an older book that is free that you can download that's very relevant today. There's also some great videos on Kamailio World's YouTube channel. So it's just many different ways where you could get started and come in. We're a pretty friendly community. So, the mailing list is very active, and newbie questions are always welcome.
Nice. Yeah. There's plus, well, you're going to be at ClueCon, right?
I will be at ClueCon in talking to Daniel, who is the main author and one of the co-founders of Kamailio. He is told me that he will also be at ClueCon. So there will be at least 2 of us there. I know that there will be people from SignalWire there that are extremely knowledgeable on Kamailio World. You have definitely some really good resources and developers on staff. You have some developers on SignalWire staff that have contributed to Kamailio and is part of the main team here.
Nice. Yeah. So ClueCon is going to be in August from 14th to 17th in Chicago at the Drake Hotel. I think there is still well, there might be a ticket sale going on when this airs, but if not, just go take a look. And it's a thing. So Fred has been, you've been there for a long time, right? I think you've done all
I love
of them.
ClueCon. Yeah, not all of them. I think I started after a few, but I mean, I've definitely been to enough where I can't keep count. I love ClueCon. ClueCon is just a great conference. And SignalWire had 5 people from the team at Kamailio World, and here Kamailio is going to have at least 2 people here at ClueCon, right? What I love about ClueCon is that it's a good community getting together. People, the discussions that you have in the hall is worth the trip to Chicago in of itself. If you have a question, or if you have a problem that you're experiencing, by the time you finish ClueCon, you're going to have an answer, or you're going to have a solution. That way, the contacts that you make in terms of getting help and getting better understanding, and in helping you develop your product, are invaluable. It is just absolutely an amazing resource for you. And I love going there. I love the hallway conversations when someone comes up to you and says, "Hey, I'm trying to do this. What can I do?" And just helping people figuring out what to do. It's a great time, a great week.
Well, that's nice to hear. Thank you so much. Yeah, we've been putting in a lot of work. I have been to, I think, 10 ClueCons, including the online ones. So not there from the start, but it's been a while, and it's always been a great experience. It used to be, well, always be, it is one of the conferences I look forward during the year. I've never been to Camellia World, but next year I'm joining. I just didn't join because there was so many people from SignalWire already that we had to spread apart a little. So I'm going to ComCon next week instead. But I'll make sure I show up at Camellia World, because it sounds like it's very interesting. And Camellia sounds like a great tool, to be fair.
Yeah, I'm really upset about not being able to make it to ComCon this year. So please give Dan my best. And they were just too close, and me being American based, it's a little tough for me to come and go and come and go. But the ComCon's a great one, and it sounds like there's a great amount of the community going as well. So that's just wonderful to hear.
Yeah, those are great. I think one conference we need to try and go to more, aside from, of course, ClueCon World World, is Posner in February, Brussels. It's we've always a bit scattered around. It's more for the Europeans, but it's a great event that has some good grounds, especially if you're looking to learn something outside your main scope. Like if you're looking to learn, something more about networking or whatever, and just go to talks about things you've never heard of, and it's great.
Yep, absolutely.
Those people are awake for 48 hours usually, which is it's quite interesting to see. Unless, like happened to me a few years ago, you have the first speaking slot on the second day. It was me, Matt Jordan, as the room moderator, and one guy from the university that was there by mistake. There was nobody else. I started speaking around 15 minutes into the time I had, because there was nobody there. There was no point in presenting to Matt, who already knew what I was talking about. So that would be very useful to him. It was quite interesting. But other than that, it's great. Cool. Well, Fred, thank you for joining us today. It was a pleasure speaking to you as usual. And Camellia is such a great tool.
Oh, thank you. And if anybody has any questions, you can reach me at qxork.com or come to kamailio.org. And, we're very friendly there. We love answering questions. Luca, it's an honor to be on this ClueCon Weekly again. I really hope I can do it again in the future as well. And I cannot wait to see you in August.
Anytime. And I'll see you in August too. Well, thank you very much again, Fred Posner from LOD, founder of the API Band Project, Kamailio team, and a friend of everybody in the open source community, honestly. Everybody knows Fred. Thank you for joining us today again. For the rest of the people, I'll see you next week. Goodbye.
Bye.